Well, hello there. Welcome to another episode of RestorationCast. This time we're talking about Babylon.
Babylon. I promised I'd sing it.
Sure you did.
By the rivers of Babylon.
It's beautiful.
I think it says something, where we sat down. That's all I really remember.
Yeah, and they like hang their harps in the tree or something like that.
Really?
I think so. I might be wrong. It's been a while since I've read that particular psalm. I didn't read it, obviously, in preparation for this.
There's a wasper, son.
Yeah.
We may have to kill that before this show's over. I've actually got a thing here.
Where did it go?
What do you call these things? Fly swatter?
Yeah.
That's what it's called.
You
I'm going to get him. He has met his creator by the rivers of Babylon. Well, it's the topic. We're not really there.
No, we don't have a river.
Be warned, waspers. All right, let's do this thing, son. What do you got for me today?
Yeah. So you guys might have noticed we're doing things a little bit differently.
A little different.
Yeah, so this is a recording, in case you didn't notice that. Which means that if we wanted to, we could cut out that whole wasp thing and nobody would ever see it.
But that's true, but now that you've mentioned it later into the thing.
Yeah, good point. Why would we do that? So.
But the reason we're recording and you're watching this at this very moment is because you are where at this moment?
I am currently in Panama.
He's currently in Panama. I am not, however. Figure that one out.
Yeah, so he's here.
I'm here.
I'm in Panama.
He's in Panama. And we're talking about Babylon.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. All right, so as always, here's your questions.
Get my head out of the way.
Take a screenshot of that or whatever you do, and there you go.
There you go. Restoration School of Biblical Studies students, there you go. And if you're not one of those, he gives these handy-dandy questions at the front end so that you can just kind of study along for yourselves, which I think is really awesomely cool.
Well, it was your idea.
What do you got on Babylon?
All right, so the history of Babylon.
You always seem to start with the history. I think I like this trend that you got going here.
Thank you.
History of Babylon. Next thing we'll probably do, I don't know, I'm just guessing, is first mention of Babylon, last mention of Babylon, then we'll get into where we're actually going to talk about. Am I right?
Yeah.
You are so predictable.
Oh,
You're like a Hallmark movie.
thanks.
We always make fun of Cindy. Gabriel and I watch these Hallmark movies, but there's every once in a while, not very often, every once in a while, we sit there predicting what's going to happen next and she doesn't like it. All right, I'm done. Let's do Babylon.
All right. So on the map here, you can see the green in there is like the, that's the Fertile Crescent. And then you've got, I had to get a bigger map because our other map doesn't show Babylon. But you can see Babylonia right over there. And then Babylon, obviously, is in Babylonia. So they're kind of, they go together.
Yeah. And geographical note, which probably good Bible students already know this, but the reason they call it the Fertile Crescent, obviously, is because it goes over here near the rivers. You'll notice there's no rivers in here. This is the Arabian Desert. You would think that if you're going to go straight over here to Israel from Babylon, you'd go this way, right? But then again, when you think there's a big desert there, that's not. So back to Abraham, as we know, Abraham, he starts down here in Ur, and he's going to travel this Fertile Crescent until he comes down in there. I've said enough at the front end of this. Probably gave away too much, didn't I?
Maybe a little bit.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. So yeah, first thing we have is that Babylon was built by Nimrod.
Love that name. I really wish that we would have named you that.
Nimrod.
This is my Nimrod son.
But,
he's a Nimrod.
But you didn't, because Mom wouldn't let you, I guess.
No, I gave you a Gabriel, which he is very smart.
Yeah. So Nimrod builds the city of Babel, not Babylon, but Babel, which later seems to become Babylon, which morphs into the Tower of Babel, right? So We got Nimrod, we got the Tower of Babel. They, all gather here to this one spot,
Right.
Which is backed up by Abraham, right?
Right.
So
all same area.
yeah. So Abraham is from Ur, which, as you pointed out, is right over there. So he's from that area. I guess he's not strictly from Babylon, but he's around, in that area.
Which leads us to, a lot of folks believe that the Garden of Eden is down in this area.
Yeah.
Were you going to say that too?
I was not going to say that,
Oh,
but
good.
that is true.
Which, it kind of makes sense. The whole Bible story kind of begins down here. Although, by the time you get Abraham, we've had the Noah situation.
Yeah, so.
And he's going to fall out somewhere up here probably, right? Where's the Mount Ararat?
So.
It's somewhere up here, I think. Okay. Second promise that I've made. I'm done.
So yeah, you've got Nimrod, you got the city of Babel, the Tower of Babel, and then the Tower of Babel happens, the people disperse, and the next thing you have is Abraham, the
Right.
very next story. So you kind of would get the indication maybe they haven't gone that far yet, that kind of thing, and so it makes sense that Abraham would be right there in that area, near where Babel would have been. The first mention of the actual name Babylon, which we're actually not going to hit that one because we're going to talk about Nimrod. But the first mention of the name Babylon comes from the story of Israel, the northern part.
So here's the Dead Sea, so it'd be up in this area.
Yeah, so it basically, you remember last time we talked about the idea of the divided kingdom,
Right.
right? So the kingdom is divided in half. The south half becomes Judah, and the top half stays as Israel. Well, after the whole Elijah thing, right? Well after.
Fireball from heaven.
Yeah, after all of that, the people still haven't turned back to God like they should have, and so God sends them into exile, and He sends them into exile via
Northern
Assyria, the northern kingdom, which is up there at the right there. So they're carted off by Assyria, but then what happens is the Assyrians, it's not good enough for them to just take the people away, right? They also have to make the land shameful, I guess, in a way, and so they take the people out of their land, and then they take other people to repopulate the land, so that the Israelites would have to intermarry with these other people. That's where we get the Samaritans.
So they would bring folks back here. They'd take folks up here. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, something like that. But they bring in groups from several different places,
Right.
Right, to repopulate the land, and one of those places is Babylon.
Oh, so they brought folks from here to here.
Yes. Yeah. So whenever Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman, the woman at the well,
Yeah.
Probably she would have had some kind of Babylonian ancestry.
Look at you.
Yeah. So.
I knew the part about Assyria transplanting people, but I did not know the part about them coming from Babylon. That is really interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, they come from various other
Right.
places as well, but Babylon is one of them. The next thing is Hezekiah basically shows off the wealth of Israel,
Right.
or Judah rather, the wealth of Judah to the Babylonians, right? So he kind of sets up this whole thing that's going to happen next. But whenever God decides that He's going to send the southern half, send Judah into exile, He does that via the Babylonians.
Right, over here. These folks, the northerns, they never really come home. They're dispersed.
Really.
They're gone. But these folks, they're going to do this and then come back again, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So they're taken to Babylon, basically, which again is kind of set up by Hezekiah. He's a good king, but then he seems like kind of in his like moment of pride
Yeah.
or something,
Yeah.
like shows off the wealth of Israel
Yeah, what are you
or
thinking, man?
Judah to the Babylonians, and then later they're going to come back for all of it. In fact, that's what God says. Like he's like, because you did this, they're going to be the ones that cart you off. And during your son's time, and Hezekiah's like, well, at least it won't be my time. All right. So, yeah, it's
Wow.
good old Hezekiah. But
don't
then,
say too much, bad. Dad, your grandpa loves Hezekiah because of the tunnel.
I mean, he's a good king.
Okay, good.
I mean, there's him and
Made
there's
up.
Josiah.
And then from there on, you got nothing.
Yep. Yeah. So anyway, you have that whole story of their taken off into Babylonian captivity, and then Babylon is destroyed by Persia. All right. So Babylon has like this whole empire, and then the Persians come in and start their own empire essentially, and they basically just take over. All right. So they go in and they kill the king of Babylon. There's kind of like this whole coup type thing going on.
Interesting story. That's the meanie TKLU Farson.
Yes,
story.
it is that story.
And on the wall.
Yeah, and so the Persians come in and they take over, and then the Persians are actually the ones that allow the Jews to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild.
And you're probably gonna say, but Esther is probably our most prominent representative of the Persian Empire.
Yeah.
So you got the Assyrian Empire, which falls to the Babylonian Empire, which falls to the Persian Empire.
Yeah, and you can kind of probably surmise that in some way, because of all of that, that like the Israelites that go into Assyrian captivity, they don't just like all die off, So like they are like still around, kinda.
Right. Yeah.
And so like maybe they go back with everybody else, but they're not actually mentioned again.
I see.
So is that what happened? I don't know. Are these just like the people that are out in the dispersion?
Right.
There's actually a lot of that goes on in this story of basically all the Jews are living in Palestine, right? And then once they get carted off into captivity, then they start living in other places. So in the New Testament, we've got synagogues,
Right.
Right, which would be like they go out and they gather in these places for worship, but it would have been a separate place from the temple, right? So in the New Testament, you've got those, which would have been started during this time, because they would say, we don't have the temple, we can't go back to Jerusalem
Right.
To worship, and so instead we're going to figure out a way that we can worship where we are at, all right, which is kind of a new development that happens during this captivity period, but then it really gets developed in the New Testament.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's basically where we find ourselves in the church now. Is we don't have synagogues, but we have that same idea of I don't have to be in one place. I don't have to be at the temple in Jerusalem to worship God. I can do that anywhere.
Right. And to further your point, Esther would be a good example of somebody who never went home.
Yeah.
I mean, so clearly many, if not most of the Jews do not make the return. They're going to stay in this area, well, many areas, but they're going to congregate here. That's why I'm of the opinion that the wise men at the time of Jesus' birth probably came from the Persia area, the ancient Persia area. Now they say, I've heard people say as far as China, because this is going to be east, the men from the east. But I think they came from here. And that would make sense. These are God's people who are still separated from the temple. They're studying God's stuff, probably with even a greater degree of interest, because they're so separated from the epicenter of religiosity. They're the ones who figure out, hey, the Messiah's going to be born.
Yeah.
And they make the trip back to Jerusalem.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. It says east, but it doesn't say how far east, right? So it could be that east means like they're right over here at the other side of the Dead Sea, right?
Yeah.
They don't necessarily go far at all, which kind of we got another wasp. But part of our problem, we'll talk a lot about the idea of like the wise men don't come at like the birth scene of Jesus. And a lot of the reason for that is we say, well, look how far they would have had to travel, right? It's that, and it says Jesus is in a house rather than an inn, or not an inn, a stable, which kind of indicates, maybe he's, has grown a little bit. They've moved into a house at this point, that kind of thing. But there kind of seems to be, again, the wise men could have come from anywhere, right? So, was this 2 years later because they had to come from Far East, or, is this, I don't know, is this a week later because, they're just on the other side of the Dead Sea? It's not,
we don't.
It doesn't say, exactly. Yeah. What we know is east, and probably what that means has to be east of the Jordan River. Right, so it's not saying east is in, like the next town over from Bethlehem, right? It's talking about another place.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say, beyond that point, how far they had to have been, right? Yeah. It just says east.
And we look here, and we just assume this is the Arabian Desert, so there's nobody on the east side of the Jordan. Well, that's just not true. Yeah. I've landed in Jordan. I'm on Jordan myself. There's a lot on the east side of Jordan. The Jordan River is what keeps it fertile. So the further you move east, you get out into the desert. But certainly there would have been a lot of folks on the east side of the Jordan River.
Yeah, and as far as I know, there's like nomadic people that live in the Arabian Desert.
True.
And so, it's not that people don't live there. Just not a lot of people.
Right.
So, maybe they were.
Yeah. Maybe there was. I still think they came from Persia, guys.
Could be.
All right, what else? Since I've distracted you so much from did you have any of that in mind at all when we were? No. I really got you off. Let's continue.
All right. So the first mention of Babel.
Our buddy Nimrod.
Yes. So Genesis chapter 10, verses 8 through 10 says, Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. So
look at there.
Was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar.
Here you go.
So, there we have our first mention of the name Babel is the fact that it's built by Nimrod. The name Nimrod, it actually means "let us rebel," which is interesting, especially because you get this mention of Babylon, right, or of Babel rather. So his name means "let us rebel." He builds the city of Babel, and then that's what the Tower of Babel is all about, right?
Yeah,
they
definitely
rebel against God. That he basically says, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and they say we'd rather just stay right here.
Right.
Let's just build a tower up to the heavens.
Now Nimrod himself did not build the Tower of Babel.
No,
but he begins the city, which evidently becomes very prominent, a collecting place of almost the center of civilization, because that's where people are gathering to build this tower. Yeah,
exactly. And you mentioned the name Nimrod being funny.
I did say that.
So obviously in this context, you hear Nimrod and they're like the mighty hunter before the Lord, right? It doesn't. The description of him doesn't sound nearly as funny as his name does.
No.
And the reason why his name is funny is because of Bugs Bunny.
The original comic.
So
himself.
Bugs
Bunny, huh?
Bugs Bunny.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you would have like these, Bugs Bunny cartoons, with him and Elmer Fudd's trying to kill him,
right.
And he would call Elmer Fudd Nimrod, which was like mocking him, saying, you're such a mighty hunter, so sarcastically.
No kidding.
Nimrod, but we basically heard that, and we've kind of translated it over to become, well, he's calling him an idiot
Because he never catches Bugs Bunny.
yeah, exactly. So we've kind of changed the meaning.
That's interesting.
But yeah, so that's where the term
Nimrod and Elmer Fudd.
Yes.
I would not have made the connection. Thank you, son. I feel like my brain has expanded.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So yeah, Nimrod, the original one, builds the city of Babel, which is where the Tower of Babel ends up being built.
But he probably would have gotten Bugs Bunny, the original Nimrod.
Probably, yeah.
But Elmer...
He, in fact, was a mighty hunter.
Because it says that.
Yeah. Yeah, so he was the first mighty hunter.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Apparently. So, but yeah, so Nimrod builds the Tower of Babel, not the tower, but the city. And, it all becomes kind of this culmination of this is what not necessarily evil looks like, but this is what like an evil civilization.
Yeah, the rebellious people.
Yeah, kind of in the same way that you would see like Egypt in the Bible.
Right.
You get this same idea. Obviously, this is the later version of Egypt. All right, Egypt
Right.
2.0, because the children of Israel come out of Egypt and then they have all these years of I guess relative prosperity in Israel, but then they're taken from their homeland to Babylon, and it kind of becomes the whole Egypt Exodus scenario all over again.
Like you said, 2.0. Then they will be brought out of that setting, as well, just like they were in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably going to mention it, so I won't belabor it. But last night in our family Bible study, as we were reading the Book of Revelation, Babylon comes up.
Yeah.
But it's a reference to evil. It's not a reference to good.
Yeah, exactly. And so our last mention of Babylon comes in Revelation.
I didn't know, honestly. He doesn't share the slides ahead of time.
So this is Revelation chapter 18. We were reading chapter 17 last night, I think.
I think you
but yeah, so Revelation 17, there's this great prostitute. And by great, I think I mean large.
Certainly an influence.
Yeah.
I don't know how many prostitutes are. I think we better just move on.
I think it's just one, but isn't she like a giant?
She's a big one.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's this prostitute called Babylon in Revelation chapter 17. And the idea is that, she's called a prostitute, but it's not actually, it's representing something, right? There's kind of the implication that, is John actually seeing a prostitute, or is he like, the implication is that it's either a woman or it's a city. We're going to talk about this again, by the way, in the next lesson.
So I probably okay, go ahead.
But, so there's kind of, it talks about it like it's a prostitute, so kind of like this Jezebel figure almost.
Yes.
And then it's also, her name is Babylon, so you kind of get the idea that maybe it's a city. Whenever she's destroyed in chapter 18, they talk about her like she's a city, right? Not like a woman. And so you kind of get this, what's actually going on here. Obviously, it's what is it?
Allegory?
Allegory works. But, it's metaphorical. It's
symbolism?
Symbolism, yes. Thank you. So, you can see that, in the passage that, it makes no veiled attempt at like trying to make you think, oh, he's actually saying all of this stuff is actually going to happen, like it's clearly symbolism for something. What? I don't know.
Yeah, because it actually says that when you get later in 17, it actually says, well, let me tell you what this represents or what this means, which we read last night, and I still didn't understand it.
Yeah.
But your point is well taken that, if the Holy Spirit himself is going to say, now let me explain the symbolism, it's probably safe for you to refer to it as symbolism.
Yeah, exactly. So Revelation 17, she's introduced.
Right.
Revelation 18, she's destroyed.
She gets what's coming.
Right. So Revelation 18:21, This is the last time.
And you're
she's
bouncing me all
mentioned.
over the book.
Revelation 18:21. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence, and will be found no more." So again, here you have it, as a city, right? You've got the picture there is the ruins of Babylon.
Oh wow!
By the way. But you've got Babylon as being pictured here as a city,
Right.
17 a woman, 18 a city, and it's talking about this idea of the city of Babylon is going to be thrown down with great violence, and actually that didn't really happen in the Old Testament. Babylon was overthrown, but it wasn't that violent.
Even when they go to the Persians, it's almost kind of like a transfer of power.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of what was going on during that time is the Babylonians didn't like their king, right? And so one writing, historical document, which how accurate is this really, we don't know, but one historical document about Cyrus taking over Babylon.
Bless you and everybody that's watching.
There you go. One document actually says the people rejoiced whenever Cyrus took over. All right, whenever the Babylonians went in and took over, or the Persians went over and took over Babylon. And so you kind of get this idea of like this really isn't that violent of a thing, right? They kind of want this to happen, and so he just kind of comes in and kills the proper people that need to be killed, and everybody else he just kind of leaves alone, right? So it's like this description of it's going to be thrown down with great violence doesn't really happen. And the other thing is like Babylon doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like this was an ancient civilization. It's gone now. Obviously, the place where it was is still there, but you kind of get this idea of like this is written well after Babylon has been destroyed, and
it wasn't destroyed violently, as you said.
Yeah.
So that leads us to what conclusion?
Again, it leads us to the conclusion that this is all symbolism.
Right.
He's not really talking about Babylon.
Yeah.
Right? He's using the name Babylon to represent that rebelliousness, that evil that we talked about with Nimrod, with the Tower of Babel. Right? And so, again, Babylon, like Egypt, becomes this representation of what an evil civilization looks like. And so they're used again in Revelation 18, kind of to represent what evil actually is.
Yeah, and we've seen that before with Jezebel, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Jezebel's mentioned in the book of Revelation. Jezebel's long dead.
Mm-hmm.
So this is symbolism. Babylon's long been destroyed. So this is symbolism. On and on you can go with that. And oftentimes it's actually in reference to Jerusalem, which doesn't get mentioned, but is named something else, like Egypt or Babylon or whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So you get this idea that like this is not talking about Babylon specifically, but it is talking about kind of the world and the times that we live in, right?
Yeah.
And so Babylon, we would say the world, right? Paul would say the world also in his writings, but it becomes representative of everything that is not the church, right? Everything outside of that is essentially Babylon. And so going into the rest of our lesson.
Oh, here's that big, I love it when you put these big letters, because that means this is what we're supposed to learn.
Yeah, so we kind of get this idea of, this question of how do we live in the world without being of the world.
Definitely.
Right? And I looked it up. This is one of those those things that we say a lot that's not actually in the Bible.
Yeah.
Right.
Not word for word.
Not exactly. The principle's there, right? But it's kind of like cleanliness is next to godliness, right?
I've heard that all my life.
One of those things that
I've
Christians
seen
say.
a lot of clean people who weren't very godly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's it's one of those things Christians say that probably most Christians would
Yeah.
think, maybe this is in the Bible.
Titus 5 and 9.
I'd look it up.
No, it's not there.
Oh.
It's just not in there.
Yeah, exactly. So, you've got this idea of this is kind of one of those things that, probably there will be some of you guys that are surprised that this is not in the Bible, but it's not. Again, the principle is there, and so we can learn something about this idea of how do we be the kinds of people that we live in this fallen world, this context of brokenness. We live kind of next to the Babylonians, right? That there are people in the world that don't like us, that want us gone, and yet we have to live next to those people. We have to live in the world, and yet we're also called to be people that are, again, and we're not of the world. All right, we're the kinds of people that are looking elsewhere and trying to live for heaven, right? Heaven rather than this world.
Use the other phrase that often goes with this?
Sure.
A boat is in the ocean, but the ocean must never be in the boat.
Yeah, exactly. So that's this idea of how do we be in the ocean without the ocean being in us. And we're going to look at the example of Daniel. Because it's topical, right? And Daniel is in Babylon. He and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Love those guys. The 3 Hebrew children.
Yeah, they are all taken into Babylonian captivity, right? So whenever the Babylonians go and they destroy Judah, they destroy Jerusalem, they take all kinds of people,
right?
But specifically they take important people, right? Nobles, people that are wise, and then good-looking youths, which would be these guys.
The 4 Hebrew children.
The 4 Hebrew children, yeah, exactly. And so they go to Babylon, and basically what you see is the book of Daniel becomes this story about how you do what we were just talking about, right?
Yeah,
how you
definitely.
live in the world without being of the world. Because what Daniel essentially has to do is he has to live as a Babylonian without becoming a Babylonian, right?
Yeah.
He has a Babylonian job. He works directly for the Babylonian king. He lives in Babylon, and yet he still has to hold on to his Jewish identity through all of that.
Yeah, powerful illustration.
And so he really becomes what we as Christians are, right?
Yeah.
That he is not living in his homeland. Here's another one.
Man.
He's not living in his homeland, and yet he, must live as an Israelite, as a Jew outside of Israel.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's what we have to do. So basically the story of Daniel chapter 2.
I'm going to rename the wasp Babylon.
Okay.
Because they're evil. And they're just everywhere, and they just always, and they sting and they hurt. I'll take care of it, son. If it gets over here,
thanks.
That old boy, we'll introduce him to the Lord.
So the story, sorry.
You just go ahead, son. I'll take care of you, buddy.
The story of Daniel chapter 2.
Daniel chapter 2.
Daniel and his 3 friends. Did you get it?
It took me 17 swings, but that boy is gone.
See if we can make it through the rest of the podcast.
Daniel chapter 2.
Daniel chapter 2. So Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their names are also, their Hebrew names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, by the way.
You did that really well.
Thank you. Anyway, so Daniel and his 3 friends have all basically been given Babylonian jobs, right? So they have become wise men, right? Kind of like the wise men from the east that we talked about
There
earlier.
you go.
All right, so they're like these Babylonian wise men, which it's kind of unclear what their actual role is.
Yeah.
But they seem to be kind of like Babylonian politicians, basically.
Yeah.
Like they advise the king.
Aren't they called satraps or something like that at some point? I always loved that word.
Yeah, but that'll be under the Persians.
I apologize for bringing it up under Daniel.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's all right.
Well, I mean, Daniel is one of them, but it's later.
Later.
Yeah, after the Persians take over.
Transfer of power.
Yeah, exactly. So they become these wise men, and part of the responsibility of the wise men is to interpret dreams. Right. So you remember Joseph, and how he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. I mean, that's part of his job, right? He even says he has like a cup for divination, right? That seems like part of his job is actually to interpret these signs and wonders and dreams and all of these different things. And so that's part of Daniel's job as well. But the king doesn't, I guess maybe he doesn't trust the Hebrews, really, because he has this dream, and then he calls in like all of the Babylonian wise men. Right, none of the Hebrew ones. He calls in the Babylonian wise men, and he tells them, I want you to tell me the dream that I just had. Tell me what it was. And then tell me the interpretation.
They're not going to be able to fake this one.
Yeah, exactly. They can't just like pick some allegory or something and try to tell him. They have to actually know the dream ahead of time, and so they don't know the dream, right? They can't figure it out, and so this is what happens. So Daniel chapter 2 verses 12 through 16 says, because of this the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. Wow. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. And then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Right, so the king calls in all of his Babylonian wise men, and they can't tell him the interpretation of the dream, or they can't tell him what the dream is. And so he says, "Oh, I'm just going to kill all you guys." Right? He gets so mad he decides to kill everybody, including Daniel.
Right, which didn't even had a chance up to this point to evidently.
Yeah, exactly. So Daniel basically says, "I'm going to go and I will interpret the dream for these guys." Right? And what's interesting about this is, yes, Daniel is saving himself. He's saving, his friends, right? But he's also saving all of the other Babylonian wise men, right? And so I think kind of what we see from this is the first way that we live in the world without being of the world is we have to be good citizens.
That's good.
Right? We have to be the kinds of people that we look around and we see the other people around us, and we do things on their behalf, right?
Yeah, we care for others even if they're not necessarily like-minded.
Yeah, exactly. We do whatever the net positive thing is.
Yeah.
All right, that this is good for everybody, and so we do those kinds of things. The New Testament talks about this a lot, actually. This idea of follow the laws of the land, right? Be a good citizen. So part of being a good Christian actually means being a good member of your community.
Right.
Right.
I think that's a good application.
And so I mean that again, that applies to all of us, right? So we don't necessarily live in a world like Daniel does, or even like the early church did, right? They're facing a lot of persecution, specifically because of their faith. In both cases, Daniel, it's really more of his nationality than his faith specifically. But they're going through this persecution, and most of us, I would say, probably aren't going through that kind of religious persecution. But at the same time, we have these. We still live in communities, right?
Sure.
We still have places around us that have laws. We have places that make it difficult to be a Christian, right? And regardless of where you live, the world makes it difficult to be a Christian. Even if they're not persecuting you. In America, our problem is largely that the people are constantly like pushing their ideas on us. Right, so you watch television or something along those lines, and they're going to be pushing these radical left ideas, right? Homosexuality or all of these different things, in TV shows and commercials and all of these different things. They're going to be pushing these not Christian ideals onto Christians, right? And so that's not persecution per se. They're not stopping us from doing anything or any of those different things, but they are trying to compel us to change our opinions about the world, about Jesus. And so they are clearly in opposition to us. And it's our call as Christians to do what's best for them as well, right? To continue living as good people, as good citizens, and to do things that are best for everybody.
Sure.
For everyone in our community.
I think that another illustration of that is, I know there's a lot of workplaces where it's been deemed inappropriate to have religious conversations, even to the extent that they would say, no, we're not, that kind of thing. We're not going to talk Bible. We're not, whatever. Yeah. And you can have your job threatened. I know that takes place in America, and I've even been in situations where I thought to myself, okay, so what do I do? And somebody taught me years ago that sometimes you got to choose your battles. And is this the hill to die on, or would it be better for me to use a Christian example as an opportunity to influence this person outside the workplace more? That kind of thing. I think a lot of what you're saying comes to play even in our culture today, without the just, overt persecution. There certainly is a pushback against Christian principles.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying about Daniel would apply to us here. Even in those situations, we've got to be considerate of the community.
Yeah, exactly. And what that does is, being a good member of your community gives you the opportunity to serve and to lead to those kinds of conversations, right? So I went to the wastewater treatment plant in town.
Visited our wastewater treatment
this week, which is it was interesting.
Was it?
Yeah. So basically, what they do is they, sewer water.
Sewer water.
They clean it, all right, and they take the waste part and they make fertilizer. For farmers, and then the rest of it they clean the water so that it's good drinkable water, and then you can we don't actually drink it, but they put it in like this ditch that runs through town, and then farmers can use that to water their crops.
Irrigation.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But it's one of those things. I think we have things like that in our community. Things that are going on that that people have to do these things for infrastructure and all of these different things, and I think a lot of times we don't even realize all of the things that are going on in our communities, and so it's one of those things that it really doesn't take that much for us to be better citizens. Part of it is just being aware of what's actually going on in your community, and then I'm sure there's tons of ways that you can help out in the community.
Sure.
So really all that takes is finding somebody who does know what's going on in the community and asking them, okay, so where do I plug in? Maybe go up to the library or the courthouse or something along those lines. A place where people know what's going on, and it's easy to find a place where you can plug yourself in to your community.
And I think this is a really good, like you say, story to illustrate that. 'Cause here's a young man who is robbed from his home, taken to a foreign country, growing up there now, but evidently at this point has felt like he has become part of this community,
Mm-hmm.
at least to the extent that he's not just saving his own skin, he's going to save. I mean, he's gone out on a limb. It's a pretty big limb for him to say, tell the king, I'll come in here and take care of this if you just give me a chance. And he goes out on a limb for more than just his common Hebrew brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's kind of, like you say, he's kind of incorporated himself somewhat into the community, even though his religious values might be starkly different. He still sees an opportunity to serve.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the impact that Daniel has on Nebuchadnezzar,
Oh yeah,
the king of Babylon, seems, I mean, it's immense, right?
Oh yeah.
There's several times whenever, I think there's 2 times when Nebuchadnezzar does this, and then once that Darius does. But they basically, Daniel will do something really, really great, right? And so then Nebuchadnezzar sends out like this letter throughout the whole kingdom saying, look at how great Daniel's God is, right? And so basically what you see is, because Daniel is a member of this community, and he's a good member,
Right.
He works hard. He does all of these different things for the benefit of everybody in the community,
Right.
not just those people that he agrees with. Because of that, he has the opportunity to kind of evangelize to the king, right? The king of Babylon. And because of that, Nebuchadnezzar goes out and he tells people, right? He says, look at how great Daniel's God is.
Very good point.
So that's the first part of this. Look around at those people that are around you. Look around at your community.
Okay.
But then Daniel does something else. So he goes and he sets up this appointment with Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay.
And he immediately goes back to his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he says, all right, guys, we got to pray about this, because I don't know what the king's dream is. And so they start praying about, what is this? And then Daniel has a dream in which God reveals the interpretation and the dream to him. Right? So Daniel knows because God tells him what's going to go down, basically. And so then Daniel prays this fairly long prayer, at least by Bible standards. He prays this fairly long prayer, praising God for giving him this vision. And then he goes to the king. And he's about to tell Nebuchadnezzar what the interpretation of his dream is. And this is what happens. So Daniel 2:11 through 12. The Chaldeans...
I think
No, okay. This is before that.
Yeah.
Okay. So verses 11 and 12. This is how the Babylonian wise men answer the king before, right?
Oh, okay.
So this is interesting. You had to contrast these 2 things.
Got
So
it.
this is their response versus Daniel's response.
The Babylonian wise men now is what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So they say, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great or powerful king has asked for such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh.
That does
Right.
set him up. Daniel, pretty big, doesn't it?
Yeah, so they say we can't do it because we're not gods, all right? And they're the only ones that can interpret this dream for you. And then this is what Daniel says. So Daniel goes to the king. The king declared to Daniel 2:26 through 28. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation?" And Daniel answered the king and said, "No wise men, enchanters, or magicians, or astrologers can show the king the mystery that the king has asked." And remember, Daniel's life is on the line here. This is not the proper response.
He's doing the Elijah, though. He's dumping water on the altar.
Yeah, exactly. So he says, no, the guys you asked earlier, they were right. Nobody can tell you the interpretation of this dream. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days.
So the glory goes to God.
Yeah, exactly. So the second thing we have for, how do we live in the world but not be of the world, is we have to look up, right? We have to be looking at God, all right? Because he's ultimately the one that's going to, he's what we want to be filled with, right? The way that you prevent yourself from being filled with negative things, right, is being filled with positive things. Right? So if you're filled with the Holy Spirit, you're filled with God, then you can't be filled with something else, right? And so Daniel, he looks up, right? He calls on God, and having his friends and himself pray because of this thing that's going to happen, and then he gives God all of the credit for what ends up happening. And so we kind of ask ourselves, like, how do we cultivate that level of reliance on God? All right, and I think the thing that we do is we have to take it as small steps. Right, so there's, I don't know. Most of us, I think, are not at a place right now where we would just say, I am so totally relying on God that I'm just gonna become a missionary right now. Most of us would not be the Elijahs that are like, I'm just gonna dump water on this altar so that God looks even better whenever He burns it all up. Right? We are not those types of people. And I think the way that we become those types of people is by taking small steps in the right direction, right? So, next time you're put in a place and you're asked to do something spiritual that puts you a little bit out of your comfort zone, say yes to that, right? You don't have to say yes to like these big, huge things all the time, but you got to work up to it somehow.
Yeah.
And so, the little things, the things that put you a little bit out of your comfort zone, say yes to those things. We had a chapel speaker come and talk to us in chapel a couple weeks ago, and he was, I think in high school he started doing drugs, right? And so he started doing drugs, and he just couldn't get clean, and then he couldn't hold down a job, all of this different stuff. Eventually, his dad basically tells him, "You can come work for me, but you're going to have to go to church, right, in order to do that." So, he steps out a little bit outside of his comfort zone in like going back to church, and then while he's going to church, they notice him there, and they're like, "We see that you come to church a lot. Why don't you chaperone this youth group trip to this youth rally," right? Which you kind of say, is this really the guy we want?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he's still an addict at this point. I mean, obviously, but he's not really gotten cleaned up, all of these different things, and so is this really the guy that we want? But he basically feels like God is calling him to do this thing for whatever reason, and so he steps out of his comfort zone again, right? Just a little bit, right? It's not a big step, chaperoning a youth group trip. It's something that's relatively easy, but he does it, and because he does it, he goes and he hears this great lesson at this youth rally and ends up getting baptized, right? This guy's a preacher now. So it's those small steps that bring us to this point of completion.
Good
right?
Point.
And so next time you're asked to, I don't know, say a prayer in church, or chaperone a youth group trip, whatever it is, next time you're asked to do something that's a little bit outside of your comfort zone, but it's something that you could do for God, say yes to that opportunity.
Good.
Because that's how we build up
good.
This reliance on God, right?
You budget every week, you're going to give $30. Try taking it to 40.
Yeah.
See how God takes care of it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's looking up, right? We've seen
up. That's number 2.
Yeah, look around at your community, see where is it that I can help out my community. look up to God and see he can take care of me. I'm going to rely on him. And
I
then
hope your third point has a look in it.
it does.
Yes.
We
It's
look,
my boy.
We look ahead.
Look ahead. So look around, look up, and look ahead.
Yes. So Daniel chapter 2, still
in 2.
verses 44 through 45. Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar the interpretation of his dream.
Okay.
Right? And Daniel basically says that Nebuchadnezzar has had this dream in which he saw this idol. Right. So we've got a picture.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have my head in the way.
That's.
Is that him?
That is not Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay.
That is one of the Babylonian gods named Nabu.
No, it isn't. Seriously?
Yeah.
Nabu.
I might be pronouncing it wrong. Nabu. Okay, and you kind of some of the Babylonian names start with that, right? Like Nebuchadnezzar is Nebu or Nebu, right? So it's the same thing, just a little bit changed. Nabonidus is also a name of one of the Babylonian kings, right? So his name starts with that. So
that's interesting.
This anyway. That's
the guy with the squared off beard here. He's an idol.
Yes, he is an idol. So Nebuchadnezzar has this dream in which he sees an idol. It doesn't say what god it is, but it's an idol. He sees an idol. It's made up of all these different kinds of metal, right? So it's got this golden head, and the body is silver, and then the legs. I might be getting this wrong. It's gold, silver, bronze, and then I guess the legs are iron, and the feet are like this mixture of iron and clay, right? And Daniel basically says, and then this rock comes. And
that's a pretty important part.
It is a pretty important part. That's actually the only part we're talking about. But this rock comes and destroys the statue.
Okay.
Right? And Daniel basically says that the interpretation is that there's going to be these various kingdoms that's going to come after this one, right? So Nebuchadnezzar, his kingdom is this head of gold, right? And then there's going to be all these other kingdoms represented by all the different metals that are going to come after him, right? And we can look back in history and see all of those different kingdoms. It's interesting study and look it up on your own time. I guess I'm not going to talk about it.
And how predictive it is. I mean, it really happened. This is predicted way before it happens, and it does come about. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so, but then the stone. Right, the stone comes and it destroys the statue, and it becomes a mountain where the statue was. Now there's just this stone, and this is what Daniel says is the interpretation of that. Right, so chapter 2 verses 44 through 45, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure.
Wow.
Right, so Daniel basically says that there's all of these different kingdoms that are going to come, but at the end of this time, God is going to set up this eternal kingdom, right? And that's what Jesus did, right? Whenever he came proclaiming the kingdom of heaven, and yet, he brought the kingdom, right? That's what the church is, and yet we haven't seen the total fulfillment of this, right? We have this eternal kingdom. We're living in this eternal kingdom, and yet we're living in the world, right?
Yeah.
And we're living in the world, and yet we're of the kingdom of heaven, right? And so we see that it's this weird fulfilled and yet not totally fulfilled type of thing. And what it calls us to do is look ahead, right?
Yes.
Daniel is looking ahead to the future of this thing is going to happen eventually, right? Jesus is going to come. He's going to bring this kingdom. Daniel's looking ahead. We are also looking ahead. We're looking ahead to this point whenever God is going to come back, Jesus is going to return, and he's going to take us out of this place, right? We're not going to be in the world any longer. We're looking ahead to that point. And so I think part of that idea of looking up, cultivating that reliance on God is looking ahead to the future.
Good.
Right? Looking at the future and recognizing that God has a future set in mind for us, right? Look at Revelation and say, this is the story of how we win, right? God has this plan for us. He wants us to look forward to it, imagine it, right? Whenever I was a kid, we would always talk about what is heaven going to be like, right? Is there going to be roller coasters? Is my dog Dexter going to be there? All of these different things, and those are the things that we're called to do, right? That's how we cultivate this reliance on God, is by looking ahead to what is he going to do in the future, right? How is he going to take care of me in the future? What is heaven going to be like? Right?
That's good. So it's part of our perseverance process, if you will. I have something to look forward to, therefore I can survive the moment.
Yeah.
I have something to look forward to, therefore I can be in the world without being of the world. It doesn't have to swallow me up. I can be a ship in the ocean without the ocean being in the ship, because I've got something to look forward to. So look around, look up, look ahead.
Yeah. So we cultivate that idea by actually going out and doing the thing, right? We actually talk about what is this going to be like in the future?
Absolutely.
What will it be like whenever Jesus comes back?
Yeah.
How is that going to look? How will that affect me? We have to talk about it. We have to think about it. We have to dream about it.
Yeah.
And whenever we do those things, that's how we cultivate that. So how do we live in the world without being of the world? We look around to our communities, to those people around us. We see, how can I help these people? How can I be a good citizen? We look up to God. We rely on him to give us strength, to help us in life. And we look ahead to the future whenever Jesus is going to return and he is going to fix things, and we won't be living in the world anymore, right? Yeah. There's a time when that's coming.
That's good. That's good.
All right, so again, here are your questions for our SBS students. You've got those questions so that you can do whatever you do with them and answer them. All right, so that is the story of Babylon.
Where do we go next?
Next, we're going to look at Rome.
From Babylon to Rome.
Yeah, there's kind of a connection there. So we're going to look at Rome next week, I guess, kind of. We're going to look at it later today.
But it'll be next week for you.
So.
And he'll be home. He won't be in Panama anymore, but he still won't be live because he's got to be preaching in Jonesboro.
Yeah, so. You'll get to see that recording too.
Yes.
But anyway, we will talk to you next week, kind of.